So in this video, I'm going to go through two more sections in this chapter on the pattern of inquiry, reasoning, section 4 and section 5 on the operational character of facts, meanings. So reasoning, what is reasoning? So Dewey writes, the necessity of developing the meaning contents of ideas in their relations to one another has been incidentally noted. So developing meanings, figuring out what the meaning of something implies, what other meanings, connecting different propositions together, going from one proposition to another about some kind of idea for solving a problematic situation or resolving a problematic situation. This process, operating with symbols, constituting propositions, is reasoning in the sense of ratiocination or rational discourse. So we're talking here about rational discourse, and Dewey gives a footnote, which I'll mention. So footnote, reasoning, he says, is sometimes used to designate inference as well as ratiocination. If you remember earlier in the book, Dewey talks about the difference between inference and implication, which is a little bit different than how we use them in regular life. But inference is related to signs. We infer the existence of something from a sign, whereas a proposition implies another proposition. So Dewey says that reasoning is sometimes used to refer to both of these things. When so used in logic, the tendency is to identify inference and implication and thereby seriously confuse logical theory. And he wants to keep implication and inference as separate processes, one dealing with existential things, right? A sign from a sign, in Peircean terms, we might think from an icon or an index, we infer the existence of actual other things. An actual existence, when it's used as an icon or index, especially as an index, for example, we infer from an index, from a dark cloud, for example, that rain is likely to happen, which is an existential thing. Whereas reasoning is going to be something different. So using it as a symbol in discourse. So talking about the dark cloud, what its possible properties are, what its possible meanings are, is different than just inferring from the existence of a dark cloud some other thing. It gets a little bit complicated, but we'll try to go through some examples. But the point being, there's kind of this, I think Dewey is still under the Peircean influence of, you've got icons and indices on the one hand, and you've got symbols, language, right? Words and propositions, or terms and propositions later we'll talk about, which are involved in a different kind of process, the rational or reasoning process. Anyway, going on. When a suggested meaning is immediately accepted, inquiry is cut short. So if you're looking at some problematic situation and you kind of identify what you think is the problem and just automatically do the first thing that comes into your head, of course, reasoning is cut short. We can think maybe here of habit, right? There are certain situations where we know we need to do something. There's a convention or a habit or even an instinct for responding to that situation. We automatically do it, and there's no reasoning involved. So inquiry is cut short. Hence, the conclusion reached is not grounded, even if it happens to be correct. Right? So things that we do by habit, they end up not being logically grounded, right? It may work 99% of the time. You end up doing the right thing, but it's not logically grounded. You're not thinking through it. And that's fine in many cases. We can't think through every little thing we need to do. We can't reason about every little thing we need to do all the time. But in those cases, we're, of course, I guess we would maybe say by definition, your reaction is not logically grounded, even though, of course, it works. It might be correct, the correct thing to do. The check upon immediate acceptance is the examination of the meaning as a meaning. So what does this meaning actually imply? What consequences might follow from this particular way of stating the situation? This examination consists in noting what the meaning in question implies, kind of just said that, in relation to other meanings in the system of which it is a member, the formulated relation constituting a proposition. So this is a little bit complicated, but you might think about, what kind of, in Wittgensteinian terms, what language game are we playing? What different propositions are possible in that game? Whether we're talking about something in the physical sciences or in the humanities or just like a daily life practical situation. I've used the example before of coming into a room and a dark room and the light switch doesn't work. There's different meanings that might come into play here. We might think in terms of electricity. We might think in terms of light bulbs. And then we might develop those meanings. Well, what about electricity? Do we need to, might we look at, what about the light bulb might we look at more carefully? So this examination consists in noting what the meaning in question implies in relation to other meanings in the system of which it is a member. So maybe I should check the electricity, check the fuse box, check if their other lights are working. Or if I think it's the light bulb, well, what about the light bulb? Maybe I should check that it's screwed in correctly, that it didn't come loose, that it's not old and needing to be replaced, right? So various other propositions can follow from noting those, two different kind of possible meaning areas, electricity or light bulbs. If such and such a relation of meanings is accepted, then we are committed to such and such other relations of meanings because of their membership in the same system, right? So we're directed in different areas depending on kind of our starting point, our basic proposition about what is the problem in the situation. Through a series of intermediate meanings, a meaning is finally reached which is more clearly relevant to the problem in hand than the originally suggested idea, right? So there's various suggestions as to what the problem might be, and we work through various meanings. Well, what if I do this? What if I do this? Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. What's more likely? What other evidence can I draw on? Well, he gets more into evidence later on, but so we go through these intermediate meanings and finally derive at a likely hypothesis, and then we can go test that out. So more clearly relevant to the problem in hand than the originally suggested idea. So electricity is like a vague idea, but you can see, well, maybe the issue is with the fuse box. Maybe somehow that got triggered, so we'll go take a look at that. Or I know that I can see that the light is on in the other room, something about this room in particular, so I need to check this room and something about this room in particular. It indicates operations that can be performed to test its applicability, whereas the original idea is usually too vague to determine crucial operations, right? The original idea might be, I know the light, I just replaced the light bulb. I'm sure it's in there correctly, so it must be something about the electricity, but electricity is very vague. Well, maybe it's the fuse box, so I can go check that. Maybe the electricity in the whole building is out. I can go check that. Are other lights, or are other things working in this building, in this house, whatever it is. So it gives me a particular plan of action, right? Operations which can be performed. In other words, the idea or meaning, when developed in discourse, directs the activities which, when executed, provide the needed evidential material, right? So either the the fuse box is normal or it's not. One of the switches is flipped or it's not. Either the other lights are on in the building or it's not, or in the neighborhood, whatever. The point can be most readily appreciated in connection with scientific reasoning. So thinking about in terms of science, which Dewey often has in mind in this book. An hypothesis, once suggested and entertained, is developed in relation to other conceptual structures until it receives a form in which it can instigate and direct experiment that will disclose precisely those conditions which have the maximum possible force in determining whether the hypothesis should be accepted or rejected. So if you're knowledgeable in the sciences, you can probably think of some examples about how a scientist comes up with a hypothesis and develops it to make it more specific and testable, and determines whether it should be accepted and continued on with or rejected. I work mostly in the humanities, which is not too different. Of course, there's differences between how you go about things in the sciences and the humanities. But for example, just to give one hopefully brief example, I'm working on a project recently about transportation technologies in African American literature. So my hypothesis is that representations of different transportation technologies show different attitudes toward those technologies in particularly early 20th century or early to mid 20th century African American literature. So I might look at, for example, that attitudes towards cars are different than attitudes towards trains, which are different than attitudes towards airplanes, to take the big ones. You could also look at boats, I suppose. These are all different transportation technologies. What do they mean? My hypothesis is that they mean something different or are represented differently in African American literature, especially thinking about cars and trains, which were the most common modes of transportation that people would see, I think, particularly in cities, and even in the countryside. You'd see trucks and cars. You would see trains. You would engage with those in different ways. There's going to be some difference. Now, what are those differences? So you can think about just conceptually. African Americans might be more likely to be passengers on trains than in cars, for example. But then you have to actually go and look at the evidence. Does the evidence bear this hypothesis out? And it may or may not. So we don't need to get into all those details now, but you can see how I'm kind of developing this hypothesis about transportation technologies in early 20th century African American communities, maybe looking at this through literature, or particularly looking at this through literary representations. So determining whether the hypothesis should be accepted or rejected, or it may be that the experiment will indicate what modifications are required in the hypothesis so that it may be applicable, i.e. suited, to interpret and organize the facts of the case. So further experiment with my hypothesis may show that, class makes a bigger difference than I may have originally thought. I may have overlooked thinking about class, and that it matters, and maybe class makes a bigger difference, and maybe attitudes among lower class African Americans are very similar to attitudes among lower class white Americans, right? So you may have to modify and adjust things based on further experiment. In many familiar situations, the meaning that is most relevant has been settled because of the eventuations of experiments in prior cases, so that it is applicable almost immediately upon its occurrence. Right? So we learn from experience, and so we know what's likely to be most relevant. So if the light switch doesn't work, it's either going to have to check the fuse box or the light bulb. but it may be any number of other things as well. But there's a, based on experience, there's a set of likely solutions that I can immediately turn to. But indirectly, he goes on, but indirectly, if not directly, an idea or suggestion that is not developed in terms of the constellation of meanings to which it belongs can lead only to overt response. So if I don't develop those meanings, if I go right to the, it tells me to do something directly, go to the fuse box, go check the light bulb, do not pass go, do not collect $200. So I'm not developing that any further. Since the latter terminates inquiry, right? So overt response terminates inquiry. You're doing something now. You're no longer involved in the reasoning process. We've reasoned, or we've done our habitual thing, gone to check on this or that. It terminates our inquiry. There is then no adequate inquiry into the meaning that is used to settle the given situation, and the conclusion is insofar logically ungrounded. So if I go right away to check on the light bulb, just because I've had problems with light bulbs in the past, so I think it's going to be a problem with the light bulb. Again, I may be correct or I may be incorrect, but I may be correct, but it's logically ungrounded. I haven't developed that. Well, maybe it's this or that, or maybe it's not the light bulb. Maybe I should check on other things as well. And of course, if I go check on the light bulb and it's fine, then I realize I have to do some reasoning then. All right, just taking a drink here. We'll go on to the last section we're going to talk about in this video, although it's a little bit longer. The operational character of facts' meanings. So Dewey writes, it was stated that the observed facts of the case and the ideational contents expressed in ideas are related to each other as, respectively, a clarification of the problem involved and the proposal of some possible solution, right? So facts are about clarifying the problem involved. Perceptions, right? We look and see, or we listen or feel or whatever, to get further information about the situation. What is the actual problem? And then ideas are possible solutions to that problematic situation. And that they are, accordingly, functional divisions of the work of inquiry, divisions of labor in inquiry, I think he called them earlier. Right? Perception, conception, facts, ideas. Observed facts in their office of locating and describing the problem are existential, right? They're things existing in the world that we can see, that we kind of see as parts of the external world, or feel, or hear, or smell, or whatever. Existential. Ideational subject matter is non-existential in the sense of not being understood as part of this external world that is the location of the problem. How then do they cooperate with each other in the resolution of an existential situation, right? The situation is existential. It's an existential problem, a real problem somewhere in the world around us, not, shall we say, in the world of imagination. Oh, I think you could have, art. In art, perhaps we have problems in imagination, but that's tied, I would say, to the external world. Anyway, we won't get into artistic situations at the moment. But yeah, this problem of existential, or this distinction between existential, non-existential is a little bit tricky. But the way I understand it is, are you interpreting it as something in the external world, in the world of, shall we say, matter in a kind of naive sense, or is it something, an idea that is not yet put into practice, not yet made part of the existential world? So how do those two things cooperate with each other? The problem, Dewey says, is unsolvable, save as it is recognized that both observed facts and entertained ideas are operational. So facts and ideas are both operational. They get us to do something. They give us kind of instructions for doing something. Ideas are operational in that they instigate and direct further they instigate and direct further operations of observation, right? Ideas tell us to can tell us to look for something further. They are proposals and plans for acting upon existing conditions to bring new facts to light and to organize all these selected facts into a coherent whole. So again, if my light doesn't turn on, I have an idea. Oh, I'll check the fuse box. I think the light bulb is probably okay. Let me check the fuse box. So that's something I do, right? I go over there, I look and see. And this gives me new facts. Either it's fine or it's not. What is meant by calling facts operational? Upon the negative side, what is meant is that they are not self-sufficient and complete in themselves. So there's a fact, the room is dark, okay, but I need to do something about that, right? They are selected and described, right? So it is a problem or it's not a problem, right? The room is dark, that might be fine, maybe I'm trying to sleep. So it's good if the room is dark, but I may be trying to do something else. And so it's not just self-sufficient, right? It's a fact in the light of other things, of something that I'm trying to do. It's a problem or it's not a problem. It's this kind of problem, not that kind of problem. So the facts are selected and described, as we have seen, for a purpose, namely statement of the problem involved in such a way that its material both indicates a meaning relevant to resolution of the difficulty and serves to test its worth and validity. So, is it the fuse box? Where's the fuse box? Take a look at the fuse box. Is it relevant to this problem? If it's working normally, then it's not relevant to the problem situation and I have to check on something else. In regulated inquiry, facts are selected and arranged with the express intent of fulfilling this office. So, what are the possible issues in the room being dark despite the turning on the light switch? There's this possible issue, what should we do? They are not merely results of operations of observation, which are executed with the aid of bodily organs and auxiliary instruments of art, but they are the particular facts and kinds of facts that will link up with one another in the definite ways that are required to produce a definite end. So, another long Deweyan sentence, but facts are not merely the results of observation with our bodily organs or with other things like, telescopes, microscopes, whatever, radar, I don't know. Whatever else we might use, your glasses, things like that. Whatever you're using in the particular endeavor you're doing, whether it's in the sciences or the humanities, looking stuff up on the internet, using AI, various instruments of art. It's not merely the results of using these things, but how they are linked up with one another to point towards a particular kind of experiment we can do or a particular kind of action we can do. Those not found to connect with others in furtherance of this end are dropped and others are sought for. So there's relevant and irrelevant facts, right? And we drop the ones that are irrelevant. We keep the relevant ones, link them up with each other to make our hypothesis, our plan, more specific. Being functional, they are necessarily operational. Their function is to serve as evidence, and their evidential quality is judged on the basis of their capacity to form an ordered whole in response to operations prescribed by the ideas they occasion and support. So particular facts give rise to ideas or can be used as evidence for ideas. So let's go check the fuse box, see what's going on, or we'll check what if the lights are working in other rooms, or if the electricity is working in other rooms, that gives evidence for, okay, so it's not a general electrical problem if the lights in other rooms work, or the electricity is working in other rooms. That helps me narrow down my response. If the facts of the case were final and complete in themselves, if they did not have a special operative force in resolution of the problematic situation, they could not serve as evidence. So that's kind of evidence. That's kind of axiomatic, right? So we need facts that are relevant to the case at hand, and where they help give us a plan, an idea that we can put into action, then they are evidence, right, for that situation. The operative force of facts is apparent when we consider that no fact in isolation has evidential potency. So no fact in isolation is a piece of evidence. Going on, facts are evidential and are tests of an idea insofar as they are capable of being organized with one another. So the facts have to fit together with other facts. So it can't be, right? So the room is dark in isolation is not much of anything, right? But if I think about it in terms of light bulbs or electricity, then it becomes a fact that is relevant towards defining a problem and a solution. It says facts are evidential and are tests of an idea. So I can observe whether the lights are on, whether the lights work or don't work in another room. This is evidence of of my idea that there's some problem with the electricity. So if the lights don't work in another room, the fact of lights not working in this room is not very clear evidence of one thing or another. If the lights in another room are working, then that's evidence that there's a problem with this particular room. Right? It is evidence for a particular idea that, there must be something wrong in this particular room, and not just a general problem of electricity. The organization can be achieved only as they interact with one another. So various facts interact with one another to provide evidence for a particular idea. When the problematic situation is such as to require extensive inquiries to effect its resolution, a series of interactions intervenes. And we'll get some more specifics about that. So some observed some observed facts point to an idea that stands for a possible solution. Some observed facts point to some particular idea that could be a possible, right, is a possible solution. We won't know until we actually try it, test it. But certain facts might point to one possible solution. If we rearrange the facts, we might get pointed to another possible solution. This idea evokes more observations. So some facts, the lights work in this, don't work in this room, but work in this room. This points me to some possible solution. Maybe the fuse for this room has flipped, or maybe it's just the light bulbs. Maybe it's a light bulb in this room, or something else particular to this room. So I go gather further observations. Some of the newly observed, this idea evokes more observations. Well, let me further investigate this room. Some of the newly observed facts link up with those previously observed and are such as to rule out other observed things with respect to their evidential function. Right? So as I make further observations, gain further facts, other things are ruled out, right? Other ideas are ruled out, or other observations are ruled out. I don't observe other things if I go down this one particular line of inquiry. The new order of facts suggests a modified idea or hypothesis, which occasions new observations whose result, again, determines a new order of facts, and so on until the existing order is both unified and complete. In the course of this serial process, the ideas that represent possible solutions are tested or proved. Right? So as a researcher, I go through this all the time. Leaving aside my electricity example, I go through this all the time, for example, with my representations of transportation technologies. So I'll go to the sources, I'll make further observations. How does Richard Wright, for example, write about automobiles? How does he represent African Americans interacting with automobiles? How does Ralph Ellison represent African Americans interacting with automobiles? Are they similar? Are there differences in how they do this in novels and short stories? What about trains? I could go look at Zora Neale Hurston as well. Does gender make a difference? Maybe. Like I said, will class make a difference? I could look at white writers like Theodore Dreiser. How does he represent maybe poor white individuals interacting with automobiles or trains? So you make further and further observations, and that helps you kind of resolve your hypothesis or modify your hypothesis. I think if you think about your own life, how you go about solving problems, if you have a little bit of training about reasoning or training about scientific method, you'll see maybe your own examples from your own life kind of pop in. So going on to the last couple of paragraphs here. So meantime, the order of facts which present themselves in consequence of the experimental observation the ideas call out and direct are trial facts. So trial facts, so kind of, as he says, provisional. They are provisional, like facts that are of possible use to us. They are facts if they are observed by sound organs and techniques, right? So if there's no problem with our hearing or vision, if there's no problem with our microscopes, right? They're facts, but they are not, on that account, facts of the case. So are they actually relevant, though? Right? They are tested or proved with respect to their evidential function just as much as ideas, hypotheses, are tested with reference to their power to exercise the function of resolution. So are they actually evidence for a particular idea? Are they actually relevant to this particular case? Right? I can always see and hear various things, but are they relevant to solving this problem? The operative force of both ideas and facts is thus practically recognized in the degree in which they are connected with experiment. So can we actually use them in experiment? Do they actually suggest a particular experiment we can do, actual actions we can do to test them out? Naming them operational is but a theoretical recognition of what is involved when inquiry satisfies the conditions imposed by the necessity for experiment. So facts are operational, ideas are operational because they suggest further observations we can make, further developments of an idea that we can actually put into practice. Finishing up this section, Dewey says, I recur in this connection to what has been said about the necessity for symbols in inquiry. And symbols can be of various kinds, but we can think in particular of words at this point. It is obvious on the face of matters that a possible mode of solution must be carried in symbolic form, since it is a possibility and not an assured present existence. So if I'm deciding, trying to work out possible reasons why the lights are not turning on in this room, I come up with various possible solutions. It could be this, it could be this, it could be that. And this is obviously symbolic because I'm not actually doing anything yet. I haven't decided which cause is most likely, and therefore what further observations I will need to make or further actions I will need to make. I'm reasoning, right? Well, I kind of remember changing this light bulb recently. I think it's probably not that. I remember seeing some lights on outside, so it's probably not a general electricity problem with the neighborhood. So is it, what else could it be? What could be the likely problem here? Let's see. So observed facts, on the other hand, are existentially present, right? The lights are on or off. In this room, the lights are on or off in that room. The electricity is or is not working in other buildings. It might seem, therefore, that symbols are not required for referring to them. But if they are not carried and treated by means of symbols, they lose their provisional character. And in losing this character, they are categorically asserted, and inquiry comes to an end. Or you can think of it that just to have it as a fact in determining your actions, that needs to be symbolized. It needs to be made into a symbol. And of course, if we're just respond habitually or automatically or instinctively to something, then inquiry is not happening. Inquiry has come to an end. And we're not doing something logically grounded. We're just acting according to habit or instinct or whatever. The carrying on of inquiry requires that the facts be taken as representative and not just presented. So the facts have to be represented symbolically for the purpose of inquiry, not just presented. So the lights are dark. It might be a common problem that there's a fuse issue, and so every time I come into this room, I have to flip the fuse back on, right? I don't know why that would happen, but maybe that's just an automatic thing. So I see, the room is dark, flip the switch. Go to the fuse box, rather, and flip the fuse switch. Then I'm not representing anything. I'm just behaving according to habit because this is an ongoing problem. Of course, hopefully you would be thinking about, well, how can I actually solve this problem? In which case you would be representing these facts to you in symbolic terms as language constructions that you manipulate and come up with further ideas to more permanently solve this problem. So you're representing these facts rather than just them being presented to your senses. The demand is met by formulating them in propositions, that is, by means of symbols. And Dewey has a chapter later, I believe, on propositions, so we'll find out more about that later on. Unless they are so represented, they relapse into the total qualitative situation and just kind of instinctively or habitually responded to. Okay, well, that was a bit long, but we got a couple more sections done on the pattern of inquiry. I think there is just one more section left, common sense and scientific inquiry, and then there's a summary, and we'll be done with this chapter. So, making progress. Okay, stop here, and see you in the next one.